Stallone sat beside a forgotten veteran, and what he whispered changed everything. Welcome to Stallone Unleashed. Let us uncover what really happened. The number 17 bus wheezed to a halt, its hydraulics sighing like a weary beast of burden shedding a load it could no longer bear. The doors hissed open, revealing a tableau of urban weariness. A young mother struggling with a stroller and two restless toddlers, a student engrossed in a textbook, their brow furrowed in concentration, and near the back, a figure huddled by the window, his presence almost swallowed by the grimy twilight filtering through the scratched plexiglass. This was Arthur, a man whose story was etched in the deep lines of his face and the threadbare fabric of his coat, a coat that had seen too many seasons, too many cold nights. As new passengers boarded, a familiar dance of avoidance played out. Seats were chosen, gazes averted, a subtle, unspoken perimeter established around Arthur. It wasn't overt hostility, not usually. It was something more insidious, a quiet, collective turning away, a refusal to acknowledge a reality that was too uncomfortable, too close. Elias Thorne, a man whose own life had been a study in quiet observation and carefully measured interventions, boarded the bus at the next stop. He carried a worn leather satchel, its contents a familiar mix of books, a notebook, and tucked into an inner pocket, a small, smooth worry stone, a piece of gray river rock he'd carried for years, its coolness a tangible link to a past filled with both sorrow and quiet strength. He scanned the crowded bus, his eyes, the color of a winter dusk, taking in the scene with a practiced, non-judgmental gaze. He saw Arthur, saw the empty seats surrounding him like an invisible moat. He saw the averted eyes of the other passengers, and he felt that familiar, quiet ache, the one that always stirred within him in the presence of such casual, unthinking inhumanity. He didn't hesitate. He walked purposefully down the aisle, his footsteps steady amidst the lurching motion of the bus, and sat down in the empty seat directly beside Arthur. Arthur flinched, a small, almost imperceptible movement, his head turning sharply, his eyes, clouded with a lifetime of hardship, widening in surprise, then narrowing with a weary, ingrained suspicion. Strangers didn't sit next to Arthur. Not by choice. Elias offered a faint, unassuming smile. "Evening," he said, his voice low, calm. Arthur didn't respond, merely grunted a non-committal sound and turned back to stare out the window at the passing cityscape, a blur of indifferent lights and fleeting shadows. Elias didn't press. He understood the language of guarded silence, the protective shell built by years of neglect and disrespect. He settled into his seat, opening his satchel and taking out a well-thumbed volume of poetry, its cover softened with age. He didn't actually read. His attention, though seemingly focused on the page, was attuned to the man beside him, to the subtle cues of his breathing, the slight tremor in his hands, the almost palpable aura of loneliness that clung to him like the scent of the city streets. The bus rumbled on, a microcosm of the world, with its random collection of souls, each on their own journey, each carrying their own unseen burdens. Elias thought of the river stone in his pocket. It had been smoothed by centuries of current, by countless collisions with other stones, yet it had endured, its essential nature unchanged. Like Arthur, perhaps, a man battered by the currents of life, yet still, somehow, enduring. The air between them was thick with unspoken stories, with the quiet, persistent hum of two solitary lives briefly, unexpectedly, intersecting in the anonymous, transient space of a city bus. Elias didn't know where this journey would lead. He only knew that he couldn't remain a passive observer. Sometimes the simple act of choosing a seat, of refusing to participate in the collective turning away, was a statement in itself, a quiet act of defiance against the indifference of the world. He felt the familiar weight of his own past, the memories of losses and hardships, and it fueled not bitterness, but a profound empathy for the silent struggles of others. The bus lurched and swayed, its progress a metaphor for the often unsteady journey of life. Arthur remained withdrawn, his gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window, the city lights blurring into abstract patterns of color and shadow. Elias, though appearing absorbed in his book of poetry, was acutely aware of the older man's presence, of the subtle tension that emanated from him, a coiled spring of defensiveness and a deep, bone-weary fatigue. He noticed the threadbare cuffs of Arthur's coat, the way his knuckles, gnarled and work-worn, were white as he gripped the edge of the seat. He saw the faded tattoo on the back of one hand, a blurred insignia from a long-forgotten conflict, a silent testament to a past that most of the bus's other occupants would neither know nor care about. Elias thought of his own brother, the one whose bronze star he still carried. His brother, too, had come back from war a changed man, carrying invisible wounds that had ultimately proved more devastating than any physical injury. He understood, in a way few others could, the lingering shadows of service, the quiet battles fought long after the guns had fallen silent. The bus stopped again, and a group of boisterous teenagers boarded, their laughter loud, their energy filling the already crowded space with a new, more aggressive level of noise. They jostled past Arthur and Elias, one of them accidentally knocking Arthur's worn cap from his head. The cap, a faded, shapeless thing, rolled under the seat in front of them. Arthur flinched at the contact, then seemed to shrink further into himself, making no move to retrieve his cap. The teenagers, oblivious, continued their loud, self-absorbed conversation, their voices a jarring counterpoint to Arthur's quiet, almost invisible presence. Elias, without a word, leaned down, his movements slow, deliberate, and retrieved the cap. It was stained, a little misshapen, but it was clean. He held it for a moment, then gently placed it on the empty seat between himself and Arthur. Arthur glanced at the cap, then at Elias, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or a dawning, hesitant gratitude. He still didn't speak, but the rigid line of his shoulders seemed to soften, just a fraction. Elias returned to his book, or pretended to. He knew that sometimes the smallest acts of unassuming kindness, offered without expectation or fanfare, could be the most profound. They were the quiet affirmations of a shared humanity, a reminder that even in a world that often felt cold and indifferent, connection was still possible. The bus continued its journey, each stop bringing new faces, new stories, new dramas, both seen and unseen. Elias remained a quiet observer, a witness to the unfolding tapestry of urban life. But his attention, his empathy, remained focused on the man beside him, the man whose own story he sensed was one of profound, unacknowledged, and perhaps unbearable weight. The river stone in his pocket felt cool, smooth, a reminder of endurance, of the slow, persistent power of time and tide to shape, but not to break the essential core of things. He hoped, with a quiet, unspoken fervency, that Arthur, too, possessed that same resilient core, that same unyielding strength, however deeply it might be buried beneath layers of hardship and neglect. He found himself reflecting on the countless invisible threads that connect human lives, the shared experiences of loss and longing that often go unspoken, yet bind us together in a common tapestry of existence. The bus rattled over a particularly uneven stretch of road, the jarring motion causing Arthur to let out a small, involuntary grunt of discomfort. He shifted in his seat, his hand going to his lower back, a subtle grimace of pain flickering across his face. Elias, noticing the gesture, felt a familiar pang of empathy. He knew the language of chronic pain, the way it could wear down the spirit, leaching the color from even the brightest of days. "Long day?" Elias asked quietly, his voice neutral, non-intrusive. Arthur started, as if surprised to be addressed directly. He looked at Elias, his eyes wary, then seemed to register the genuine, unpitying concern in Elias's expression. "Yeah," Arthur rasped, his voice hoarse, like a rusty hinge. "Long life." He offered a faint, humorless smile, a ghost of a grin that didn't quite reach his tired eyes. "Some days are longer than others." "I know the feeling," Elias said, a quiet understanding in his tone. He didn't elaborate, didn't offer his own litany of aches and pains. He simply acknowledged Arthur's reality, validating his quiet struggle. They rode in silence for another few blocks, the only sounds the rumble of the engine, the hiss of the brakes, the murmur of other passengers' conversations. Then, Arthur spoke again, his voice still low, still hesitant, but with a new note, a willingness, perhaps, to break through his self-imposed isolation. "This city," Arthur said, his gaze fixed on the passing streetlights. "It chews you up and spits you out, if you let it. Don't care who you are, what you've done. Just grinds you down. It can be an unforgiving place," Elias agreed. "But it can also be a place of unexpected kindness, of surprising connections, if you know where to look, or if you're lucky enough to stumble upon them." Arthur glanced at Elias, a flicker of something like curiosity in his eyes. "You new in town?" "No," Elias replied. "Been around a while. Just a quiet observer, mostly." He paused, then added, "But I've learned that sometimes even the quietest observers have a role to play. Sometimes just being present, just acknowledging another person's existence can make a difference." Arthur seemed to consider this. He looked down at his gnarled hands, then back out the window. The faded tattoo, the insignia of his long-ago service, was stark against his pale skin under the bus's harsh fluorescent lights. "Used to think I made a difference," Arthur muttered, more to himself than to Elias. "Wore a uniform, stood for something, thought mattered." His voice was tinged with a profound, a heartbreaking bitterness. "It did matter, Arthur," Elias said, his voice firm but gentle. "It still matters. What you did, the sacrifices you made, those things don't just disappear. They become a part of who you are. They become a part of the story of this city, this country, whether people choose to remember it or not." Arthur turned to look at Elias then, his eyes searching, questioning. "You really believe that?" "I do," Elias affirmed, meeting his gaze directly. "I believe that every act of service, every quiet sacrifice, leaves an echo. And sometimes, if we listen carefully enough, we can still hear those echoes, even above the noise and the indifference of the world." The river stone in Elias's pocket felt warm now, as if imbued with the quiet conviction of his words. He thought of his brother, of the echoes of his courage that still resonated in Elias's own life, guiding his steps, shaping his choices. He knew, with an unshakable certainty, that those echoes were real, that they mattered. And he wanted Arthur, this forgotten, overlooked veteran, to know it too. This exchange, born of a shared moment of humanity on a mundane city bus, felt significant, a small crack appearing in the wall of Arthur's long-held isolation. Arthur continued to look at Elias, his expression a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, fragile hope. It had been a long time, a very long time, since anyone had spoken to him with such unflinching respect, such unconditional validation of his past, his service. Most people, when they bothered to notice him at all, saw only the present reality, the threadbare coat, the weary eyes, the aura of misfortune that clung to him like a second skin. They didn't see the young soldier he had once been, the man who had stood tall, proud, willing to lay down his life for ideals he held dear. "Echoes," Arthur repeated softly, testing the word on his tongue, as if trying to grasp its meaning, its implications. "Most days, all I hear are the other kind of echoes, the ones that keep you awake at night, the ones you can't outrun, no matter how far you walk." His voice was filled with a profound weariness, the sound of a man haunted by memories he could neither escape nor reconcile. Elias nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a deep, empathetic understanding. "I know those echoes too, Arthur," he said quietly. "Many of us do. They are the price of having lived, of having seen things that cannot be unseen, of having carried burdens that cannot easily be set down." He paused, then continued, his voice gentle but firm. "But there are other echoes as well, Arthur. The echoes of courage, of comradeship, of duty done, of sacrifices made not in vain. Those echoes are there too, if we choose to listen for them. They may be quieter, less insistent than the others, but they're stronger. They are the ones that remind us of who we truly are, of what we are capable of, even in the face of darkness and despair. Arthur listened intently, his gaze fixed on Elias's face. The bus rumbled on, its interior now dimmer as the last vestiges of daylight faded from the sky. The other passengers were mostly lost in their own worlds, oblivious to the quiet, profound conversation unfolding in the back seats. I haven't thought about those other echoes in a long time, Arthur admitted, his voice barely a whisper. It's easier, sometimes, to just let the bad ones take over, to forget there was ever anything else. It is easier, Elias agreed softly, but it is not better. Forgetting the good, the courage, the sacrifice that is to lose a vital part of ourselves, Arthur. It is to surrender to the darkness. And you, my friend, he added, his voice imbued with a quiet, unwavering conviction, are not a man who surrenders easily. I can see that in your eyes. I can see the strength that still resides within you, however battered, however weary you may feel. Arthur looked away out the window again, but this time there was a different quality to his gaze. It was less haunted, more reflective, as if Elias's words had opened a small window in the dark room of his memories, letting in a faint, unexpected ray of light. The river stone in Elias's pocket felt cool and smooth against his skin, a silent affirmation of the enduring power of hope, of resilience, of the quiet strength that can be found even in the most broken of souls. He knew this conversation was just a beginning, a fragile first step. But it was a step nonetheless, a movement away from the shadows, towards the possibility of healing, of reclaiming a lost sense of worth, of dignity. The bus journey, mundane for so many, had become for these two men a passage through shared understanding, a brief but potent connection forged in the anonymity of the evening commute. The bus pulled up to a stop in a neighborhood of low-slung buildings and fading storefronts. It was Elias's intended destination, a small, independent bookstore where he often found refuge and rare volumes. He made a move to rise, intending to offer Arthur a quiet farewell, perhaps an invitation to share a cup of coffee another time. But as he did so, Arthur turned to him, his eyes filled with a new, urgent intensity. "Wait," Arthur said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. He leaned closer to Elias, as if about to impart a secret of great significance. "There's something I gotta tell you. Something nobody else knows. Nobody else would understand." Elias settled back in his seat, his attention fully captured. He sensed that this was a critical moment, a threshold Arthur was hesitantly approaching. The bookstore could wait. This story, Arthur's story, felt far more important right now. "I'm listening, Arthur," Elias said softly, his voice an invitation to trust, to share. Arthur took a deep, shuddering breath. His gaze darted around the bus, as if to ensure no one else was listening, though the other passengers remained lost in their own worlds, oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding in the back. "It wasn't always like this," Arthur began, his voice barely a whisper, so low that Elias had to lean closer to hear. "After the war, after I came back, I really tried to make a life. Got a job, got married, had a daughter." A flicker of immense tenderness, quickly followed by a wave of profound pain, crossed Arthur's face at the mention of his daughter. She was everything to me. Lily. Her name was Lily." He paused, swallowing hard, as if the very act of speaking her name was almost too much to bear. "But the war, it followed me home, you know? In my head, in my dreams. I couldn't shake it. Started drinking too much. Lost the job. Then my wife, Sarah, she couldn't take it anymore. She left. Took Lily with her." His voice cracked on the last word, a raw, unbearable grief etched in every syllable. Elias listened in silence, his heart aching for this broken man, for the layers of loss he had endured. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. He simply bore witness to Arthur's pain, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm of Arthur's memories. "I haven't seen Lily in, God, it must be 20 years now," Arthur continued, his voice thick with unshed tears. She'd be a grown woman. Probably got kids of her own. She probably hates me. Thinks I abandoned her. And maybe I did. Maybe I wasn't strong enough to fight the demons. He looked at Elias, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading question. But here's the thing, he whispered, his voice dropping even lower, so low it was almost inaudible above the rumble of the bus. Every year on her birthday, I go to this one place, a little park we used to go to when she was small, and I leave something for her, a little something I made, a carved bird or a flower, just in case she ever goes there, in case she ever wonders if her old man still remembers her, still loves her. He paused, his breath catching in his throat. Her birthday is tomorrow. The confession, so simple, so heartbreakingly tender, hung in the air between them. Elias felt a profound wave of emotion wash over him. Sorrow, compassion, and an immense respect for this battered man who, despite everything, still clung to this fragile ritual of love and remembrance. The bus had long since passed Elias's stop. The bookstore, the poetry, the quiet solitude he had anticipated were all forgotten. Nothing mattered now but this moment, this sacred confidence, this unexpected intersection of two lives on a late-night city bus. Arthur's whispered secret had changed everything. This was no longer a casual encounter. It was a profound sharing, a laying bare of a deeply wounded, yet enduringly loving heart. Elias looked at Arthur, truly looked at him, seeing not just the threadbare coat and the weary eyes, but the profound depth of love and longing that resided within this broken man. The image of Arthur, year after year, faithfully making his pilgrimage to that small park, leaving his hand-carved tokens of remembrance for a daughter he hadn't seen in 2 decades, was almost unbearably poignant. It was an act of such quiet, unwavering devotion, such stubborn hope in the face of seemingly insurmountable loss, that it took Elias's breath away. "Arthur," Elias said softly, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show, that is a beautiful thing, a profound testament to your love for your daughter." Arthur looked down at his gnarled hands, a single tear escaping from the corner of his eye and tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. "She probably never even finds them," he whispered. "Or if she does, she probably just thinks there's some old junk someone left behind." "Don't say that, Arthur," Elias said gently but firmly. "You don't know that. And even if she never sees them, even if she never knows, the act itself, the love that motivates it, that is what matters. That is real. That is true." He paused. Then a thought, an idea, began to form in his mind, as unexpected and as insistent as Arthur's confession had been. "Arthur," Elias said, his voice taking on a new note of quiet purpose. "This park, where is it?" Arthur looked up, surprised by the question. It's called Willow Creek Park, over on the east side." "Why?" Elias didn't answer directly. He glanced out the window. The bus was now traveling through an unfamiliar part of the city, far from his intended destination. He had no idea where they were or how he would get back, but none of that seemed to matter anymore. A different journey had begun, a journey dictated not by bus routes or personal errands, but by the quiet imperative of a father's enduring love. "Arthur," Elias said, his decision made, "I believe I know what Lily would truly want for her birthday tomorrow." Arthur stared at him, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and a dawning, terrified hope. What do you mean?" "I mean," Elias said, a rare, warm smile transforming his usually stoic features, "that perhaps this year, instead of leaving a carved bird in an empty park, perhaps this year, Lily gets to see her father. Perhaps that is the greatest gift of all." The implication of Elias's words hung in the air, stunning, audacious, almost unthinkable. Arthur looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The very idea of seeing his daughter again, after all these years, after all the pain and regret, was clearly both his deepest yearning and his most profound fear. Elias reached out and placed a gentle hand on Arthur's trembling arm. "It's a long shot, Arthur," he admitted, "and it won't be easy. There are no guarantees. But don't you think it's worth a try? For Lily?" And for yourself. The bus pulled to another stop. Elias glanced out the window, then back at Arthur. This is as far as this bus goes tonight, friend, he said softly. But our journey, I think it might just be beginning. He stood up, his satchel in hand, and offered his other hand to Arthur. Come on, Arthur, he said, his voice imbued with a quiet, unshakable resolve. Let's go find your daughter. The words, so simple, so direct, yet so filled with an audacious hope, seemed to hang in the air of the nearly empty bus like a benediction. Arthur stared at Elias's outstretched hand, then at his face, seeing there not pity, not judgment, but a genuine, unwavering belief. And slowly, hesitantly, as if waking from a long, dark dream, Arthur reached out and took it. The physical contact, a simple clasping of hands, felt momentous, a sealing of an unspoken pact, a commitment to a path unknown but filled with a fragile, desperate hope. The two men stepped off the bus into the chill night air of an unfamiliar neighborhood. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows, and the city seemed to have retreated into a hushed, expectant silence. Arthur was trembling, not just from the cold, but from a mixture of fear, hope, and an almost unbearable anticipation. The idea of actually trying to find Lily, after all these years of silent longing and resigned despair, was both terrifying and exhilarating. Elias, sensing Arthur's turmoil, placed a steadying hand on his arm. One step at a time, Arthur, he said softly. We don't even know if she still lives in this city, or what her life is like now, but we can try to find out. We can start with what we do know. What do we know? Arthur asked, his voice hoarse, his gaze lost in the darkness. We know her name, Elias replied calmly. Lily Hemlock, or perhaps Lily followed by her mother's maiden name, if Sarah reverted to it. We know her approximate age, and we know that tomorrow is her birthday. Those are starting points. He paused, then added, and we know about Willow Creek Park. That is a connection, Arthur, a place of shared memory. It may be nothing, or it may be everything. They found a small, all-night diner, its windows steamy and inviting against the cold darkness. Elias insisted on buying Arthur a hot meal and several cups of strong coffee. As Arthur ate, some of his strength and composure seemed to return. The initial shock of Elias's audacious proposal was beginning to wear off, replaced by a dawning, hesitant resolve. But how, Elias? Arthur asked, his brow furrowed in thought. Where do we even begin to look? It's been so long. She could be anywhere. We begin with the tools we have, Elias replied. The internet is a vast place, Arthur. Sometimes, with a little luck and a lot of patience, it can yield unexpected treasures. He pulled out his own modest smartphone, an object he used sparingly but effectively. We can start with public records, social media, alumni networks. It will be like searching for a needle in a haystack, perhaps. But needles can be found. For the next few hours, in the quiet anonymity of the late-night diner, the two men embarked on their improbable quest. Elias, with his historian's patience and his knack for diligent research, navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the digital world. Arthur, his initial hesitancy giving way to a growing excitement, provided scraps of memory, half-forgotten details that might offer a clue. The name of the elementary school Lily had attended, a vague recollection of a cousin Sarah had once mentioned, the type of work Sarah had done before they were married. It was a slow, frustrating process. Dead ends abounded. False leads raised hopes, only to dash them again. Arthur rode an emotional roller coaster, his mood swinging between despair and a flickering, tenuous optimism. Elias remained calm, methodical, his resolve unwavering. He knew that such searches required persistence, a refusal to be discouraged by initial failures. He was searching not just for a name on a screen, but for a lost connection, a broken thread in the tapestry of a father's love. And that, he believed, was a search worth every ounce of effort, every moment of patient diligence. The river stone in his pocket seemed to pulse with a quiet energy, a silent encouragement to keep going, to keep searching, to keep believing in the possibility of finding what had been lost. The diner became their temporary command center, fueled by caffeine and a shared, desperate hope. The waitress, a kind-eyed woman who had seen her share of late-night confessions and quiet desperations, refilled their coffee cups without comment, her occasional sympathetic smiles a small, unspoken blessing on their quest. As the first pale light of dawn began to streak the eastern sky, painting the grimy windows of the diner with hues of gray and rose, Elias let out a soft, almost inaudible exclamation. "Arthur," he said, his voice tinged with a mixture of excitement and caution. I think I may have found something." Arthur, who had dozed off fitfully in the booth, his head resting against the cold vinyl, started awake, his eyes instantly alert, filled with a renewed, almost painful hope. "What is it, Elias? What did you find?" Elias turned his smartphone screen towards Arthur. On it was a public profile from a professional networking site. The name was Lily Carmichael. The age matched, the city matched, and the photograph, though older, more mature, there was an unmistakable resemblance to the faded snapshots Arthur still carried in his worn wallet, images of a bright-eyed little girl with a missing front tooth and a smile that could melt glaciers. Arthur stared at the screen, his breath catching in his throat. His hand trembled as he reached out to touch the image of this woman, this stranger who was also, impossibly, achingly, his daughter. "Lily," he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. That's her. That's my Lily." Tears streamed down Arthur's weathered face, tears of joy, of disbelief, of an overwhelming, almost unbearable flood of emotions that had been dammed up for 2 long decades. Elias watched him, his own eyes misting over. He felt a profound sense of gratitude, of awe, at this small miracle that had unfolded in the pre-dawn gloom of an anonymous city diner. The profile listed Lily Carmichael as a teacher at a local elementary school, the very same school Arthur had mentioned Lily attending as a child. It also mentioned her involvement with a community garden project located in Willow Creek Park. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture that was almost too perfect, too poignant to be believed. "She works at Willow Creek Park, Arthur," Elias said softly. "The park where you leave your gifts. She might even be there today. It's Saturday, and it's her birthday." Arthur looked at Elias, his face a mask of stunned, joyful disbelief. You think she ever found them, Elias? My little carvings." "I don't know, Arthur," Elias replied honestly. "But I think it's time you stopped leaving anonymous gifts and instead offered her the one gift that truly matters. Yourself, your presence, your love." He paused, then added, "But we need to be prepared, Arthur. She may not be ready. She may be angry. She may not want to see you. We have to respect her feelings, whatever they may be." Arthur nodded, his joy tempered by a dawning anxiety. "I understand, Elias. But just to see her, even from a distance, just to know she's all right." His voice trailed off, his heart too full for words. Elias paid for their meager meal, and the 2 men stepped out into the bright, cold morning air. The city was waking up, its usual cacophony beginning to swell. But for Arthur and Elias, it felt like a brand new world, a world filled with an almost unbearable sense of possibility. Their journey was not over. In many ways, it was just beginning. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with potential heartbreak. But it was a path they had to take. For Lily, and for Arthur, and for the enduring, unbreakable power of a father's love. The river stone in Elias's pocket felt like a silent blessing, a promise of strength for the difficult, hopeful day ahead. The weariness of a sleepless night was forgotten, replaced by a nervous, electric energy. Willow Creek Park was a small oasis of green amidst the concrete and steel of the city. It was not a grand or manicured space, but it possessed a certain wild, unruly charm. Old willow trees trailed their branches into a murky creek, and patches of brightly colored wildflowers pushed their way through cracks in the pavement. In one corner of the park, there was a small community garden, its raised beds overflowing with vegetables, herbs, and more flowers. It was here, according to Lily Carmichael's online profile, that she often spent her Saturday mornings tending to the plants, working alongside other volunteers. Arthur and Elias approached the park with a mixture of trepidation and a pounding, almost suffocating hope. Arthur had attempted to smarten himself up as best he could in the diner's restroom, but his clothes were still threadbare, his face still etched with the harsh lines of years lived on the streets. He clutched a small, newly carved wooden bird in his trembling hand, a gift he had fashioned during their long night in the diner, his old carpenter's hands remembering their long-lost skill. Elias walked beside him, a quiet, steadying presence. He knew this moment was everything to Arthur, the culmination of 2 decades of silent longing, of unspoken grief. He also knew that it could all come crashing down in an instant. They entered the park slowly, their eyes scanning the small groups of people dotted around. Children playing on a rusty swing set, an elderly couple walking their dog, a young man reading a book on a weathered bench. And then, near the community garden, they saw her. She was kneeling by a bed of bright red tomatoes, her dark hair tied back in a simple ponytail, her face smudged with dirt, her expression one of serene concentration as she gently tended to the plants. She looked so much like her mother, Sarah, that Arthur let out a small, involuntary gasp, his hand flying to his mouth. Elias placed a gentle hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Easy, friend," he whispered. Let's just watch for a moment." Lily laughed at something a fellow gardener said, and the sound, clear and bright, drifted across the park to where Arthur and Elias stood, hidden partially by the trunk of an old willow tree. It was a sound Arthur hadn't heard in 20 years, a sound he thought he would never hear again. It was like a dagger to his heart, yet also the sweetest music he had ever known. He couldn't move. He couldn't speak. He could only stare, his eyes devouring every detail of this woman, this beautiful, vibrant stranger who was also, impossibly, his daughter. Elias knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. The moment of truth, however it might unfold, was upon them. He gave Arthur's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Are you ready, Arthur?" he asked softly. Arthur took a deep, shuddering breath. He looked at Elias, his eyes filled with a mixture of terror and an immense, unwavering love. He nodded, a single, convulsive movement. "As I'll ever be, Elias," he whispered. Together, the two men stepped out from behind the willow tree and began to walk slowly, hesitantly, towards the community garden, towards Lily, towards an uncertain future that held both the promise of unimaginable joy and the potential for unbearable pain. The small wooden bird in Arthur's hand felt both impossibly heavy and as light as a feather. Each step was an agony, each breath a monumental effort. The anticipation was a living thing, coiling in Arthur's chest, making it difficult to think, to move. Lily looked up from her tomatillos as the two men approached. Her smile faded slightly as she took in their appearance. Elias, with his quiet dignity and his thoughtful eyes, and Arthur, his clothes threadbare, his face etched with a lifetime of hardship, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that was both startling and strangely familiar. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Lily asked, her voice polite but with a note of caution. She rose slowly to her feet, wiping her dirt-stained hands on her jeans. Arthur stopped a few feet away from her, unable to move closer, unable to speak. His heart was pounding so loudly he was sure she must be able to hear it. He could only stare at her, at this beautiful young woman who was his daughter, his Lily. Elias stepped forward slightly, placing a gentle hand on Arthur's arm. "Miss Carmichael?" Elias asked, his voice calm, reassuring. "My name is Elias Thorne. And this," he said, gesturing towards Arthur, "this is Arthur Hemlock. He has something he would like to give you. For your birthday." Lily looked from Elias to Arthur, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Arthur Hemlock," she repeated slowly, the name sounding vaguely familiar, yet not quite connecting. I don't think I know." Arthur could bear no longer. He took a shaky step forward, his hand outstretched, offering her the small wooden bird. "Lily," he whispered, his voice cracked, hoarse with decades of unshed tears and unspoken love. "Lilybug, it's me. It's your daddy." Lily stared at him, at the small carved bird, then back at his face. And slowly, incredibly, A flicker of recognition, of a long-buried memory, began to dawn in her eyes. She looked at the bird again, its shape so simple, so familiar. She remembered other birds, other small carvings found over the years in this very park, left anonymously on benches, tucked into the hollows of trees. She had always wondered who left them, had always felt a strange, inexplicable connection to them. And now she knew. Tears began to stream down Lily's face, tears of shock, of disbelief, of an overwhelming flood of emotions too complex, too profound for words. She took the small wooden bird from Arthur's trembling hand, her own fingers closing around it as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. "Daddy," she whispered, the word a question, a statement, a prayer. And then she did something that shattered Arthur's heart into a million pieces and put it back together again, all in the same instant. She stepped forward and threw her arms around him, hugging him with a fierce, unwavering strength, burying her face in his threadbare coat, her sobs racking her small frame. Arthur stood frozen for a moment, stunned by the reality of it, by the warmth of his daughter's embrace after all these empty, achingly lonely years. Then his own arms came up and enfolded her, clutching her to him as if he would never let her go again. Elias watched them, his own eyes filled with tears. He felt like an intruder on this sacred, intensely private moment, yet also a profoundly privileged witness to an act of love so pure, so powerful, that it seemed to transcend time, loss, and all the accumulated pain of two broken lives. The river stone in his pocket felt like a silent benediction, a testament to the enduring, unbreakable bonds of family, and to the extraordinary power of a love that had refused to be extinguished, even by decades of silence and separation. The journey had been long, arduous, uncertain, but they had arrived. And for Arthur Hemlock and his daughter Lily, it was indeed a brand new beginning. The sun, now higher in the sky, seemed to bless the scene, its warm rays a gentle caress on the reunited father and daughter, a symbol of hope and healing in a world that, for this one perfect moment, felt entirely, beautifully whole.